Masechet Yevamot, Daf Tet. Since all the way from the beginning of the Masechet, we've been discussing the word Aleha and trying to figure out why do we need the Gezerah Shava of Aleha between Yevamot and Achot Isha. And we saw several responses, and we're going to finish with the word Aleha today. And then we're going to move on and wonder about the number 15, why we have 15 cases. What about some other cases that might have been listed in our Mishnah? Okay, so to finish off the word with the word Aleha, we saw that according to Rabbanan, we saw several answers of why we need Aleha. However, Rabbi, that's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he had a different derasha altogether about how to derive we perform Yibum in a regular case, but not in the case of Adva, and everything that we had to learn, he learned it from the extra mapik in the hair of Yevamah and Lekaha, and here this word Leisha. And so Rabbi has everything figured out just with the Pisukim without the word Aleha. And so that's what we're going to deal with today. Rabbi, Hai Aleha, my Avid le. Okay, we're just going to turn out that he's going to use this word Aleha, nothing to do with marriage laws, but rather with Korbanot. What does that have to do with Korbanot? Well, this word Aleha appears also regarding Korbanot. So first we're going to introduce the basic laws, and then we'll show how Rabbi derives each of them. Once we finish that, then we will see how Rabbanan will derive each of these laws of Korbanot. They'll have to do with Korban Hatat. What exact animal does each category of person or institution bring as a Korban Chatat, and for what types of sins? So, so we begin with a Braita that's very similar to a Mishnah in Masechet Horayot. En chayavin betin ela al davar shezedono karet v'shigigato chatat v'chen hamashiach. Okay, first category is a chiyuv of a bet din. If a bet din makes an error in judgment and the people follow the bet din, and then they realize, oh, it was a mistake what we told you, so the bet din has to bring a korban chatat. What do they bring it for? Not for any law that they make a mistake about, but only a law that if one did it on purpose, one would receive karet. Then, if you do it by mistake, what they have to bring a korban chatat, only for a sin. That if you did it on purpose, it would be karet. If you did it by mistake, it would be a chatat. If they made a mistake about that category of law, then the bet din would have to bring their special korban, which we'll see what that is in a second. And the same is true for v'chen hamashiach. Mashiach doesn't mean the Messiah here is going to come in the future, but rather Kohen HaMashiach, a Kohen Gadol who is anointed. If the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake and follows his own mistake, then he also brings a special Korban Chatat, but only if he makes a mistake regarding this category of error. Velo ba'avodah zara ela al davar shechayvin al zedono karet v'shigato chatat. And also, when a community brings a chatat for avodah zara. Avodah zara we're going to see is a separate category. And should a bet din come and make a mistake regarding avodah zara, how would that be? They only bring a korban chatat if it's something that also would be zedono karet and shigato chatat. The example for that is if they would tell people that one is permitted to bow down to a certain idol, well, that would be karet. If they tell people that it's permitted to hug this idol, and that's not the normal way that it's worshipped, then that would not receive karet, and so that bet din would not have to bring their korban chatat for avodah zara. All right, that was a shorthand version. Now we're going to bring in more detail. Bring another Mishnah that has this more detail. Kol mitzvah shebatorah shechavin al zedono karet v'al shigoto chatat. So only the category of mitzvot in Torah that if you do it on purpose, you would get karet, and by mistake, you would get chatat. For example, eating chelif, forbidden fat. So in all these cases, if Yachid, Mevi Kisba or Se'ira, an individual who makes such a sin has to bring either Kisba or Se'ira. Nasi, meaning the leader of the nation or king, Mevi Sa'ir, if he makes that mistake, Mashiach ubetin mevi'in par, and the Kohen, Gadol, and the Betin who makes such a mistake, in their ruling, they bring a larger animal, a par, because they cause the whole public to trip up, so they have to do something greater. All right, let's look at the Pisukim. This is not as complicated as it looks, because really what we just did is summarize what the Pisukim say back in Parashat Vayikra, where it's talking about Nefesh ki chata bishkaga mikol misvot. So that's the overall introduction to Korban Hatat. And then we have 4 subcategories in the green. First, Kohen HaMashiach Yecheta. Good, that's the Kohen Gadol, and he brings Par Ben Bakar. What it doesn't say is what exact type of sin. Is it for any sin, for a little one, for a big one? Does he have to bring this Par Ben Bakar? That's what we're going to figure out. But this is obvious. And Kol Adat Yisrael Yishku v'ne'elam davar min ha'kahal. How could everyone in the whole nation all make the same mistake? Well, it's because from the eyes of the generation, meaning from the Betin, they gave a mistaken ruling. Okay, they also bring a par. So these 2 categories are par. And then Nasi, that's the king, leader, brings Seir Izim. And then lastly, Nefesh Echat Techeta Bishkaga Me'am Ha'aretz, just a regular person, brings Seirat Izim. All right, so the Mishnah just summarized exactly what we had here. And this seems to be referring to a general category of sins. And so we are looking for a derivation. This is where it's going to be. You see the word Aleha in the red here? That's it. Okay, so this Aleha, what do you need? Asher Tchateu V'ikribu. What do you need the word Aleha for? It's pointing to the wife's sister case. If someone tries to marry 2 sisters, then that is Chayav Karet. We know that from the concluding pasuk in Vayikra 18 that all arayot on that list are Isure Karet. So this Aleh comes to teach that everything here, all these korbanot are only brought if, in fact, it's a sin that would require karet. If done on purpose, then they bring this korban hatat when done by mistake. Okay, this is all going to be one source. We're also going to bring in, while we're in the Pisukim, another source from Bimidbar. And this here is talking about Avodah Zarah, at least part of it. We're going to take the whole thing as talking about Avodah Zarah, because it says, so to do something with a mighty hand against Hashem. So this is referring to Avodah Zarah. And so we'll see how this plays in a moment. Okay, so we have these categories, and we know exactly for what type of animal each category has to bring. And now we're bringing all this for the bee, right? The question is, what does the bee do with the word aleha? Okay, so now that we know that, we're continuing. The Mishnah says, Avodah Zarah Yachid, Nasi, B'Avodah Zarah Yachid, Nasi u'Mashiach mevi'ain se'ira. If the sin that one does is regarding Avodah Zarah, that's why we're going to bring in that section of Bimidbar, then both an individual and the king and the Kohen Gadol, if they make an error regarding Avodah Zarah, they all bring Se'ira. Whereas Sibur mevi'im par v'sa'ir, par le'olah v'sa'ir lechatat, Sibur has to bring both par and Sa'ir, and you can see that here. We're linking these together because of the letter Vav, which we'll see in a second. So par ben bakar echad le'olah min chatok mishpat usir ezim echad lechatat. So there you go. That's a different korban, so it must be for a different type of violation. And here we associate it with Avodah Zarah. All right, good. Now, now that we know all of the laws for each category, we want to know the source. So for the source, we bring another braita. Tetanora banan. The pasuk that I hadn't read, that's it here. If they recognize the sin that they did, upon the sin upon which they sinned, Rabbi Omer, Ne'emar kan aleha, v'ne'emar lahlan aleha. Ma lahlan davar shechayvim al zedono karet, v'al shigato chatat. Afkan davar shechayvim al zedono karet, v'al shigato chatat. So Rabbi gives his explanation of why we need the word aleha here and regarding the case of the wife's sister, because just like the wife's sister is a sin for which if one did it on purpose, they would get karet, and if by mistake it would be chatat. So too, that teaches me that the word aleha also means that all these four categories of people will bring a korban chatat only if it's a matter that if they did it on purpose, it would be hayav karet. Very good. Ashkechan. So now this aleha actually only appears here in the case of korban sibur, meaning for a betin. So I know this case. How will I know all the other cases? That's the question. Ashkechan sibur mashiach minelan dichtiv b'mashiach lashmat ha'am adem mashiach kesibur. So regarding Mashiach, it says these words. Le'ashmat ha'am. If a Kohen does something for the guilt of the whole nation, well, what do you mean the guilt of the whole nation? It was only the Kohen Gadol that did it. Nevertheless, he's the leader. People look up to him, and so because his sin is considered like the sin of the whole nation, therefore it must be the same type of korban as when the whole nation follows the betin. And so this word tells me treat the Kohen Gadol the same as the betin. All right, we got a source for those first two categories. Ayachid v'nasi atya misvot misvot. And the next two categories of the nasi and yachid, well, looky here. We have the word mitzvot in the introduction, and we have, so it's called mikola mitzvot. So if you're wondering, what would this include? Well, it says mitzvot also here regarding betin. It also says it regarding the nasi. And so therefore, the word mitzvot connects the various sections together to show that all of them, one is required to bring a korban only if it's something that, if you did it on purpose, you would need to you would be liable to karet. Okay. Okay, so now back to the category of avodah zarah. So we already answered the question for the B. That's what we need aleha. But now that we're here, we want to bring the source for all of them. So regarding avodah zarah, only if one worships avodah zarah in a way like bowing or giving incense to it, were typical ways of doing idolatry. That's chayav karet. But not otherwise, if one can do idolatry in an unusual way and would not get karet. Okay, so how do we know that? Sibur, sibur, ba'avodah zarah yelef me'aneh. Oh, so we're going to learn the category of sibur. It says here me'aneh hakahal, me'aneh, and also says here me'aneh ha'eda nesta lishkaga. So through this Gezerah Shavah, we learn that just as this category is only if it's something that would require karet, which we learned from Aleha, so too we assume that this paragraph about avodah zarah in public is also going to be the same. And then we're going to ask about everyone else. You see that in Bimidbar, it does not specify Kohen, Nasi. It just says Nefesh Achat, an individual. And so that's going to include all individuals in this paragraph who all bring the very same thing. And as Bachanata Chatat, and here it says this Vav, if it was starting a new topic, it would have said Im Nefesh Achat, but the Ve'im connects these two together. And so if this is only something that's would be karet, so to this would only something which would be karet if done on purpose. That's going to be the next line. Me'aneh, Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, Me've, Im Nefesh Achat, Achat Yachid, V'achat Nasi, V'achat Mashiach b'mashma, Vav, Mosif al inyan rishon. Right, the Vav says that we put them all together. Ilmet tachton min ha'elyon. And the second paragraph, second paragraph, we will learn from the first paragraph, just like this. We only bring korban chatat if it requires karet when done on purpose. So too, regarding all the individuals in the second paragraph. All right, good. So now we solved everything according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We already saw how he learns all the laws of Yibum from those two mapik in the hairs. And we saw what he does with Aleha, and how from that one Aleha, that is the source to say that a chain of Gezerot Shavot, starting with Aleha, is the source that in all these Korban Hatat offerings are only required in a case where the violation on purpose would be karet. Good. So now that we did all that for Rabbi, now for Rabbanan, how is Rabbanan going to know what all the categories of Korban Chatat are? When do you have to bring Korban Chatat? He's going to agree with the Rabbanan are going to agree with the halacha that it's only if it's something that is zedono karet, veshigato hatat. However, the Rabbanan cannot use aleha because Rabbanan already used aleha for marriage laws. So where are they going to derive all this? Nafkalahu midim makri le Rabbi Yoshua libre Torah achat yeh lachem laoseh bishkaga v'nefesh asher taseh beyad rama. Okay, so we get it from this pasuk that happened to be a pasuk that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi read to his son and taught him these laws, and this is the concluding law in Bemidbar, which says Torah achat, one law will be for everyone. And so and also the next pasuk says someone who does this on purpose. So actually we have an explicit mention of karet here. So for the Rabbanan, this is going to be the source. We don't need aleha. It says karet here, and it says it's the same law for everyone. So there you go. Uksha kol Torah kula la'avodah zara. Ma'avodah zara davar shechavin al zedono karet. Val shigato hatat. Af kol davar shechavin al zedono karet. Val shigato hatat. And so all of the Torah, all matters, all types of sins are all juxtaposed to avodah zarah. Just like regarding avodah zarah, would only brings a katat. If it's something that if you did on purpose would be karet, so too in regarding the other laws as well, that would be the same. Good. Ashkehan yachid v'nasi u'mashiach. Okay, that paragraph was only talking about individuals. Ben b'avodah zarah or ben b'sham mitzvot, and so now we know all individuals in avodah zarah or any other mitzvah, they will bring a korban chatat only if it's zedono karet. However, sibur b'avodah zarah minayin. What about a community that sins, meaning the betin? Amar kera ve'im nefesh v'yilmod alyon mitachton. Oh, so for this, you see, we're going the opposite way around. The Rabbanan are starting down here, and they're saying the vav connects these two together, and just like this category is for individuals, and although this only deals with individuals regarding avodah zarah, we say avodah zarah is similar to all other sins. So now individuals regarding all sins, only if it's chayav karet, as it says here. This vav says that it applies also to a communal obligation, meaning a betin would have to bring their korban of avodah zarah only if it was something that was worthy of karet if done on purpose. Good. Okay, the only thing left is regarding a judge or betin that makes a mistake regarding all other mitzvot. You see that for individuals it has said Torah achat, so we could learn it. But how about, it doesn't say Torah achat regarding the communal obligation. So yalef me'aneh me'aneh. So we use the same gezerah shava we used before, me'aneh, but now we're going to go backwards, back here to me'aneh. And so now we know that just like this, so to here, the betin that makes a mistake regarding any all non-avodah zarah sins is only, they only bring their korban if it's something that would be chayav al zedono karet. Good. Okay, so that concludes what Rabbanan do with it. Here's a nice chart that you can find in thanks to Art Scroll that summarizes it. This is the order of the Gemara that we just said, and if you notice, it goes in chiastic order. For the B, we start with the communal error regarding non-idolatry, and so we learn that from Aleha Aleha. Whereas Rabbanan, they come to that last because they're going in the other way, other direction. So communal error and non-idolatry here. Okay, so next Rabbi learns from that to the anointed, and then to the private person, individual, and ruler. It says mitzvot. It says mitzvot only by one of them, but they're both individuals. So it applies to both. And then we go from the non-idolatry section to the idolatry, communal and personal. And that's how to be ends. But the rabbis actually start with that last paragraph and know that personal idolatry because it says right there, and from there they go to all other ranks because it says Torah Achat, and from there they go to communal idolatry because that's the paragraph beforehand, and from there they make a link to Vayikra that is true for everyone. All right, so we have not only something very comprehensive, but also very well structured. Okay, Vidabi, hi, Torah Achat, my Avidle. Fine, now that you have this beautiful structure, we have one problem left over. Rabbanan depended on this pasuk, Torah Achat. But what Rabbi didn't use it. So what does Rabbi use that pasuk for? Because I need to say that there's one law for all cases because I might have thought that it shouldn't be a law, the same law in all cases. Why would I think there wouldn't be the same? Because the pasuk does distinguish between an individual who worships avodah zarah and merubim. Merubim in this case does not mean the betin, but rather a city, ir hanidachat, the whole city. Goes and worships avodah zarah, so the whole city has to be destroyed. But there's a difference. If an individual worships avodah zarah, he gets the most severe type of capital punishment, which is sikilah. Since he's getting such a severe type of capital punishment, we don't take away his money. Okay, what good is his money if he's just been stoned to death? Well, his children can inherit it. So there's still something good about that. Whereas for the Ir Hanidachat, when the whole city practices idolatry, and the city is destroyed by sword, which is not pleasant, but is less severe than sekila. And so since they get the benefit of having the less severe capital punishment, therefore, they also, on the other hand, their money is destroyed, is burnt in the middle of the city. And so there's a balance here. Either you get the worst capital punishment, but your money goes to your children, or you get the lesser capital punishment, but the money does not go. Okay, you could pick your poison, literally here. Okay, anyway, the point is that since the Torah does distinguish between two laws regarding these two cases of avodah zarah, so perhaps in those cases when one does idolatry by mistake, perhaps the korbanot will be different. Oh, Talmud Lomar, Torah Achat Yelachem. This to teach me that whether everyone in an entire city, or most people, or one person worship avodah zarah, but they do so by in error, they all get the same punishment, and that would be nefesh achat, bring seirat izim, and so that's why it has to say Torah Achat here, that regarding avodah zarah. Ez ben shenata lechatat here. This is it. This is the ayaz is for avodah zarah, and it's one law for everyone, whether it's just one individual or an entire city. Otherwise, we might have thought to distinguish between them. Okay, good. So that's a good answer. We just have one last challenge on that. Matkif la Rab Chilkiah meHagaroniya. He's challenging, really, how would you think it would be possible to make a distinction between the type of korban that an individual or a whole city brings if they do avodah zarah by mistake? And you said it's only the same korban because it says one law for all. Otherwise, you would have made a different law. My there too. What different law could you possibly make? And he's going to go through all possibilities and show that every type of korban is already taken for some category or another. There is no different type of korban that you're going to bring, that you can bring, and you can't just make one up and decide, okay, I'm going to just find some other animal that the Torah does not prescribe. And so he's just wondering about, like, what other possibility were you thinking of? So, like, two pod, what do you want? What do you want the community to bring? A pod? Sibur b'sham bisvot hu demaitu. No, sibur, only a betin brings a pod in those other cases. What do you want to bring? A kisba? Yachid b'shar misvotu demaiti. An individual brings a kispa in regarding non-idolatry. Sa'ir, nasi b'shar misvotu demaiti. The king is one who brings a sa'ir, right? So you can't bring it also for something else. Right? These two animals are brought by a betin who errs in avodah zarah. So ve'ela mai sa'ira. If you're going to bring se'ira, well, that's the individual korban, so it's not any different. So, you can't just make up a new category or use a category that's already taken by someone else, because then it's not actually different from what is there already. So what were you thinking that you would even need Torah achat, as if it's not going to fit into a previous category? And the answer is two answers. I might have thought, when a betin makes a mistake and they're teaching, what do they bring? Par le'olah and say lechatat. Oh, I could have said that when a city all does avodah zarah, then the people in that city will bring the same two korbanot, but they could bring them the opposite way around. They could bring a par lechatat and a sa'ir le'olah, and that way they're not making up a totally new type of korban that never existed, because you can't just do that. But they're taking something that is in the Torah, but shifting it a little. So that's a possible way that there could have been something different, if not for the pasuk of Torah Hat. Iname sarich ve'en lo takana kamash malan. Or I might have thought, the individuals in a city who do avodah zarah, they are required to bring some korban, but they can't, because they're all already taken by other categories. And so therefore, they would not be able to receive atonement for their error. I might have thought that they're different in that way. So that's why, according to the B, we need that pasuk of Torah Achat in order to teach that the laws of mistaken avodah zarah for an individual, for a whole city, are the same, and everyone brings the same korban as a yachid would if they worshipped avodah zarah. And that concludes our long discussion of the word aleha and all the other derashot and connected laws that derived from it. We now move on to the next section, which is going back all the way to the Mishnah. The Mishnah listed 15 cases where the Yevamah is an Isur Adayot to the Yavam, and therefore the one would be patur from performing Yibum, and does not have to do Chalitza either, and is even prohibited from performing Yibum with the co-wife of the Erva. Okay, now we're wondering why only these 15 are listed. What about some other cases? And we're going to bring up some really fascinating and pretty strange cases to test out why we don't mention them. So here's the question. Amar Levi Lirabi. Levi asks his teacher to be, why say 15? Say 16. All right, there are other cases. And Rabbi's response is funny. And Rabbi says, seems to me that my student Levi has no brain in his head. In other words, he's missing something, right? He's a very bright student, but what other case might he have in mind? And so let's try it out. My da'atach, what are you thinking, Levi? Imo anusat aviv, is this a case that you would like to include? Someone's mother who was raped by his father. Imo anusat aviv pilukta Rabbi Yehuda biflukta la kamairi. That case is subject to a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, and therefore our Mishnah wants to bring only clear-cut cases that everyone agrees with, and not one that would be a machloket. That's why this case is not included. Okay, what is this case? It's a case of like this. You have Levi and Miriam who are married to each other, and they have a child, Shimon. Everything is a beautiful, nice family so far. But Levi turns evil, and he goes and rapes Shifra and has with her a child, Menashe. Okay, so now he has two sons from two different, one's a wife and one is not related. And now this child Shimon, this family is getting crazier and crazier. This child Shimon goes ahead and marries full kiddushin the rape victim, who happens to be his half brother's mother also. That is permitted according to Rabbanan. This marriage, this is prohibited according to the Biuda. The Biuda says this is kind of like his father's, not wife, but he did have relations with her. The Biuda says not permitted to do this. But Rabbanan say it is permitted. Now let's say Shimon dies, and that would mean Menashe, without children, that would mean Menashe should do Yibum for Shimon. You do Yibum with Shimon's wife. Shimon's wife is Shifra, but that's also Menashe's mother. So obviously he's not going to perform Yibum with his mother. But this could be included in the Mishnah. That he cannot do that. And let's say Shimon had another co-wife, another wife. So then this would say that Menashe may not perform Yibum on Leah, either the co-wife. So this is a case that you could have included in the Mishnah. Because if it's the criteria, and the answer is no. Since the Biuda says that this marriage is not permitted, although actually he would agree that if you did it, the marriage may stick. But nevertheless, since it's a forbidden marriage, the Mishnah is not dealing with that case, and because the Biuda would disagree with this case, and this would not be a permitted case to happen. Therefore, we do not include it in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, we want to bring only clear-cut cases. Okay, good. So now that we have this rule that we only include clear-cut cases, what about, is that really true? Vela, is that true? You're not including all other cases? Vara isur mitzvah. Ve'isur kedusha tepeligi Rabbi Akiva v'Rabbanan ve'kataneh. Yet in the next perek, we're going to see of Masechet Yevamot, we're going to see that there are cases that are subject to machloket that are included in the Mishnah, and they are isur mitzvah. Isur mitzvah means cases where the Yevama would be arayot, but not a direct arayot, only shiniyot. There's a category of 21 people that are sub mideoraita as incest, those listed in the Torah, and there's the secondary category, like a person's grandmother. It's not included, not mentioned in the Pesukim, but the rabbis add it. So it's called mitzvah, because mitzvah to listen to the rabbis, and so therefore any of these cases should be included, and the other cases is isur kedusha, the prohibited marriages that are because of, let's say, someone who's not allowed to marry a kohen or a mamzer. These are cases that one does not get karet, right? Not for the shiniyot, not for like the grandmother case, and not for these mamzer. If one performs a marriage, if one has a union with them or performs a marriage, then they are not chayavim with karet. And so in those cases, there is a machloket. Rabbanan say that one must perform chalitza in those cases, since they don't have karet. So midoraita, it could be a good marriage. So therefore, you still have to do something. So you have to do chalitza, but obviously you can't do yibum because the marriages are prohibited. But they're still not so prohibited that it would break the zikah. So the Rabbanan say you have to do chalitza. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with there and says, no, you don't even have to do chalitza. That these cases are like the cases in our opening Mishnah. Anyway, these are mentioned in the Mishnah, even though they are subject to a machloket. So this undoes the rule that you mentioned before, that we only mention things that have no machloket in the Mishnah. And so we answer, when we said this rule that we only mention unanimous laws, that's only in this chapter, in the first chapter of Masechet Yevamot. In other chapters, we'll get into more depth and we'll discuss other things. But this chapter here, we wanted to only give clear-cut unanimous cases. It's an introduction after all, and even the introduction is complicated enough. We can simplify it by giving only unanimous cases in this first chapter. But then we ask about that. Hold on. We actually are going to see in the second chapter that what we said in the first Mishnah is only according to Bet Hillel. But only Bet Hillel thinks that should, in a case of, let's say, Sarat Bita, when someone marries their niece and dies, and then the father would have to do yibum with his daughter. No, he doesn't do yibum with his daughter, and therefore not with the daughter's co-wife either. That's only Bet Hillel that says you don't know yibum, no chalitza. Bet Shammai actually says that one must perform yibum with even the daughter's co-wife or any other of the relationships. So actually, all the cases in our Mishnah are subject to machloket. Right? Bet Shammai matin tasadot la'achin u Bet Hillel osrin. And so the answer to that is Bet Shammai b'mkom Bet Hillel and Mishnah. No, Bet Shammai. I know they disagree, but they are not even considered part of the oral tradition. This is a pretty harsh statement against Bet Shammai, because we do say Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim, and they actually are included in the Mishnah. But the point is that the machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai is of greater distance than other machlokot. We're including Bet Shammai, but they're a little more off to the side than, let's say Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosef, who are well within the mainstream tradition. Bet Shammai, we quote them, but you can still call it unanimous because Bet Shammai has been so far removed from halachic practice. Once we say halacha ke Bet Hillel, that they're mentioned really theoretically, so we can still consider that unanimous in our first Mishnah, and the rule holds. In fact, yes, the first chapter, we're only dealing with unanimous cases. All right, we're going to test it out again. In our very first Mishnah, we mentioned the case of the brother's wife who was not born yet when the older brother died. The deceased brother died before a third brother was born. And that is subject to a machloket, because Rabbanan say that that third brother who's born afterwards does not perform yibum, and Rabbi Shimon says he does perform yibum. And yet we mention that machloket, even though we mention that case, even though it's a machloket. And we answer no. Ben olad ul basof yibem la pelige Rabbi Shimon. Within that case, there's actually a subcase. There's two subcases, which I'll show you in a second on the chart. If the third brother was born after the brother died, but before the yibum was done by the second brother, in that case, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that the third brother cannot do yibum after the second brother dies. And let's see that in a nice chart here. Okay, so the first case we mentioned, which would be subject to a machloket, we're going to switch around this numbers 4 and 5 for the first instance that we ask a question about. So in this case, you have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to Esther. In this case, this happens to be my name and my wife's name, but we're not related to these people because Reuven dies. And Reuven dies. So that's the third thing that happens. Fourth is Shimon. Shimon then performs yibum. Okay, so he performs yibum, and then after that, Levi is born. Okay, so when Levi is born, so he has a sister-in-law, Esther here, but this Esther had already been a sister-in-law to him because she was married to Reuven as well before he was born. Okay, now in this case, should Shimon then die, according to Rabbanan, Levi is not allowed to perform Yibum because even though he is Shimon's wife, and they were alive together at the same time, but Levi was not alive at the time of Reuven. And Pasuk says, Ki yeshivu achim yachdav. We only can perform Yibum when the brothers are alive at the same time, because Reuven had already been married to Esther before Levi was born. They were not around at the same time. Therefore, the status of Reuven as his brother's wife remains throughout, no matter what else happens after. So even though, his brother's wife from Shimon, that would be the classic case of Yibum, but she was already prohibited as Reuven's wife, so it's no good. According to Rabbanan. In that case is where Rabbi Shimon said that it would be permitted. Because Rabbi Shimon would say, I don't care what happened before Levi was born. If he wasn't born yet, then there's no relevance to me. And therefore, when Levi is born, all he knows is that Shimon is married to Esther, so it's a sister-in-law. But if he dies without children, then it's a classic case of Yibum, so Shimon would permit it. So that case would be subject to a machloket. Why are you including it in the Mishnah? And the answer is, wait, there's another variation of this case that Rabbi Shimon would agree with. And that's if we take the numbers in order now. Don't switch around 4 and 5. This is 4, this is 5. So once again, we have these two brothers. Reuven marries Esther. Okay, very good. And then he dies. So now Shimon is supposed to perform Yibum with Esther. He takes his time. And at that point, Levi is born. Levi is born before the Yibum happens. When Levi is born, so he was not alive when Reuven was alive. Therefore, he cannot perform Yibum. He is disqualified from performing Yibum. Because he's disqualified from performing Yibum, that woman is his sister-in-law, his brother's sister, and therefore prohibited forever. So here, for the Bishimon, the difference is that he, when he's born, we do take into account only from when he's born on. But at the point that he's born, she is a prohibited person because someone has to do Yibum and it can't be him, and therefore she is prohibited as sister-in-law. Shimon, however, can do Yibum because he was alive at the same time, so he performs Yibum, and then should he die as well, Levi may never take Esther, because even though it's his brother's wife who was around when he was alive, he was also his brother's wife who was not around when he was alive, and he was already rejected as Yavam. A rejected Yavam is prohibited forever. And so that's a case where Rabbi Shimon would agree, and therefore it is in fact a unanimous case. At least one of the variations of this case is unanimous, and therefore it's fitting to add into the Mishnah. Okay, well, last point about that case. Hold on, Rabbi Oshaya thinks that Rabbi Shimon disagreed with the rabbis in both cases and would have permitted Yibum in both cases, where the rabbis disagreed and said it's prohibited in both cases. And so according to that, it is a machloket no matter what. Yeah, but we're not going to bring all the argument here. This will be cited and discussed on Daf Yotet. So you have to wait till Daf Yotet to see what his reason was and why he was refuted. But in any case, Rabbi Hoshaya was refuted, and Rabbi Shimon only disagrees in one case but agrees in the other case, and therefore this is a case that can be brought in for a very first Mishnah, because at least one variation of it is in fact unanimous. At this point, we're upholding our rule that our Mishnah has only 15 unanimous cases, and it only includes unanimous cases, and that includes the case of the younger brother who's born after the older brother dies. And although there Rabbi Shimon disagrees in some cases, but there's at least one case where even he would agree that it's prohibited, because generally he's more lenient. Okay, and lastly, we're going to bring this statement of Rav and Rabbi Chia, according to which we will necessarily have a case mentioned in the Mishnah that we will need to rely on the leniency of Rabbi Shimon, and therefore our Mishnah will depend on a machloket. We'll have include a case of machloket, and that will go against the rule we said before that our Mishnah only includes unanimous cases. Okay, this is going to involve some interesting and complex cases. So I hope if you like puzzles, you'll like these cases. So here it goes. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav v'chen tane Rabbi Chiya bechulan ani kore bahen hasura lazeh muteret lazeh v'hasura lazeh muteret lazeh. In order to understand this, we need a little background of some cases that are going to be mentioned in the third chapter of the Mishnayot. Okay, so here we're going to have two contrasting cases, this one here and this one here. So let's see how it works. If we have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, and they marry two sisters, Rachel and Leah. So everything's so far so good. And now Reuven marries Rachel, Shimon marries Leah, and Reuven and Shimon both die without children. And so now there are two Yevamot. So there are two surviving brothers, Levi and Yehuda. They were alive the whole time. And here's the law of the Mishnah. Neither of them may do yibum. The reason is because even though Levi is not married to either one, he has a connection. He's zakuk liyavam. He has a connection to both Rachel and Leah. And because they are sisters, it's kind of like he is married, almost married, has a requirement to marry two sisters. And so therefore they cancel each other out. He can't take Rachel because he has a zikah to Leah. He can't take Leah because he also has a zikah to Rachel, and therefore both are prohibited to Levi. And the same is true for Yehuda. And therefore they may not do, neither of them can perform yibum. Okay, so that's an interesting case where that zikah is strong enough that it involves it enacts the prohibition of sisters upon either brother. Now, ironically, if they are more closely related, we actually can have a case where yibum would be permitted. All right, we have the same case. There are four brothers. Two brothers marry two sisters and marry two sisters. Now, Reuven has a daughter. Reuven and Rachel have a daughter. Let's call her Bat Rachel to make it easy. And now this is Reuven's daughter. This is Levi's niece. Now, Levi is allowed to marry his niece. There's nothing wrong with that. And so he goes ahead and does that. And then Reuven and Shimon die. Okay, so they die, and now Levi may not perform yibum with Rachel because that is with Bat Rachel. Because Rachel is Levi's mother-in-law, right? Reuven and Rachel were married, had a daughter, Bat Rachel. Levi married his niece, so Rachel, the mother of Bat Rachel, Rachel is his mother-in-law. So he may not take his mother-in-law as in yibum. That is prohibited. However, he's not related to Leah. Right, Leah is his other niece. I mean, he's related, but not in a prohibited way, and therefore Levi may perform yibum with Leah. Good. Yehuda in this case still would be prohibited from either one because for him they're both his nieces and they're both and they are sisters. And because they're sisters, it has a zikah to both of them. He cannot do yibum with either. But this is a case where Levi can do yibum. So this is in contrast to the first case here, where neither Levi or Yehuda can perform yibum. In this case, because one of the sisters is already prohibited to him. Because it's his mother-in-law, therefore that she's out of the picture altogether. She's not even, there's no zikah there because there's no zikah to one sister and only a zikah to Leah. So they do not cancel each other out for Levi. So Levi can perform yibum with Leah. That's a good case. We have a slightly more complicated case. If we just take that previous case and kind of double it, where you have two brothers are married to two sisters, and then another brother, Levi, marries Bat Rachel, and Yehuda marries Bat Shimon. And then Reuven and Shimon die. So in this case, two brothers can perform Yibum. Levi, again, cannot perform Yibum on Rachel because that's his mother-in-law, but he can perform Yibum on Leah, who's his other niece. And Yehuda cannot perform Yibum on Leah because that's his mother-in-law, but he can perform Yibum on Rachel, who is his other niece. And so, right, this is kind of a paradox that even though in this case, there are many more relations, but because the one of the sisters is prohibited to each brother, therefore the zikah of two sisters does not cause a problem, and they can marry each other. Good. So this is a case where we apply the rule that we meant that Rabbi Chia and Rav mentioned, that says hasura lazeh muteret lazeh. In such a case, the sister who was prohibited to one is permitted to the other, and the one that is prohibited to the other is permitted to this one, right? Each of the brothers may marry one of the sisters. The one that as long as he's prohibited to one, he can marry the other. And so achota shehi yevimta choleset o mityabemet, the sister who is also the sister-in-law, meaning in those permitted cases, one can do chalitza or even do yibum. Okay, so now we understand how that law applies to this case, to the case we just mentioned. And here's the chidush of Rav and Rabbi Chia bechulan. He says in all 15 cases mentioned in the Mishnah, you can find such a scenario where you'll involve a case where one brother will be permitted to one sister, but prohibited to one, but permitted to the other, and therefore would be able to do yibum with one and not the other. Okay, if you're interested, you can go through all of these cases. Just a warning, they get quite complex, right? So bat bito, bat ishto, bat beno, bat bita, and there are charts for all of these, bat bena, achayot, and so on, achot imo, eshet achiv me'imo, and achot ishto, and this one we're coming to. Okay, eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo, we will explain this. So Rabbi Chia and Rav say that this rule here applies. You can figure out a scenario in which this would apply to all 15 cases. However, Rav Yehuda metargem mechamato va'elach. Rav Yehuda disagrees and says this rule of you can marry one sister if you're prohibited from the other sister, you can only find such cases from the case of mother-in-law until the end, which is the seventh case. Aval shita babe deresha la maitama. The first 6 cases, you cannot find such a scenario. It's impossible. Why not? How come Rav Yehuda limits that rule of you can find one sister to marry as long as the other one is prohibited? How come he says it only applies to the lower cases, but not the first cases? Oh, kevan de bito. Because of the case of bito, let's look at the bito case, which he's going to show that you can only construct a case like this regarding bito if it is here it is. If you assume that the woman here, the mother of the sisters, the mother of these sisters, Rachel and Leah, have the same mother, this woman just called Isha, but this woman cannot possibly be married to Reuven and Shimon and must involve a case of rape. And so Rav Yehuda does not want the Mishnah to involve cases of rape, but only of regular marriage. So let's explain the details of this case. We have four brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Reuven rapes a woman, Isha, and has a daughter, Rachel. His brother Shimon also rapes this same woman, not a very fine family, but still they produced an interesting case, and has a daughter, Leah. Okay, now Levi comes and he decides to marry Rachel. That's his brother Reuven's daughter, so that's his niece. Although this Isha is not the wife, she's not married to anybody, but Levi is permitted to her. And Yehuda marries Shimon's daughter Leah, who is his niece. And so everything is okay until we have two deaths. Levi and Yehuda both die without children. And so Reuven and Shimon are called upon to perform Yibum. Reuven obviously may not do Yibum with Rachel, that's his daughter, even though it's not from his, even though she never married this rape victim, nevertheless, it's still his daughter, so that would be prohibited. However, Reuven can perform Yibum with Leah, because if Reuven had married this woman, then she would be his wife's daughter, and that is prohibited. But because it's a case of rape, so he is permitted to her as his rape victim's other daughter, and so he can perform Yibum. And Shimon also can perform Yibum with Rachel. And so here you have a case regarding Bitah where you apply this principle that if they were all unrelated, right, two brothers and two sisters fall as Yevamot together, then Reuven could not marry either of them because he has a zikah to both of them, and so the prohibition of sisters applies. But because he's prohibited to one of the sisters, therefore he's permitted to the other sister. And Shimon also, because he's prohibited to one sister, he may perform Yibum to the other sister. So here you go. Here's a case of Bitah. And this is the critical case, Kevan de Bita. Look how the Gemara says all that just in two words. So here's the point. Rav and Rabbi Chia, they said that we can find examples of the Asura lazeh muteret lazeh principle in all 15 cases. And that's true only if you allow cases of rape within the Mishnah. And they're okay with that. Rav Yehuda, however, says no, I don't like that. Only in the first 6 cases. In the first 6 cases, this does not apply. Only from the 7th case on, then you can find cases of marriage in which the rule applies, but not the first 6. For example, Bito, that does not work unless you assume rape, and therefore he kicks that out. Good. Right, according to the Yehuda, you can only find it with honest, with rape, and not with full marriage. The Mishnah is dealing with marriage cases, not with rape cases. Okay, Abaye, and now yet another opinion. Abaye metargem af bito manusato kevan dashkuchem mashkachat la ibayamina nasin teve ibayamina nisuin teve. He's okay. He goes halfway between the first 2 opinions, and he says, yeah, even those the case of Bitah or the first 6 cases, it's fine because the Mishnah is mentioning both marriage cases and rape cases. If such a case can possibly happen, then it should be included in the Mishnah. But there is, however, one case where it's not going to work, at least not according to Rabbanan. Aval eshet achiv shelo haya be'olamo la mai ta'ama. So this rule of asura lazeh muteret lazeh cannot apply to the case mentioned in the Mishnah of the brother who was not born before the older brother died. Why? Kevan de Rabbi Shimon hu de mashkachat la, the Rabbanan la mashkachat la, biflukta la kamairi, because such a case would only be possible according to Rabbi Shimon and not according to Rabbanan. And we already saw that our Mishnah does not deal with mahalokot. And so it can apply to most of the cases, 14 cases, but not the 15th case. All right, so we'll look at that in a second, but let's just finish it off. Rav Safra metargem af eshet achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. However, Rav Safra disagrees with everyone above, and he says even he can apply that principle even to eshet achiv shelo haya ba'olamo, to all 15 cases. There is a case of you can find this, but not that. And you can find the case regarding the brother who was not in the world before the older brother died. He was not born yet. And it'll be in a case where there are 6 brothers. I'm going to show you this case of you need 6 brothers to make it work. And you have to assume the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who is lenient regarding such cases. If you want to remember how this case works, remember this mnemonic, which we'll see in a diagram. And according to Rav Safra, what are you going to do with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi does not have to agree with the statement of Rabbi Chia at all. So it was Rabbi Chia and Rav's opinion that you can find cases of Asurat Lazeh, Muteret Lazeh in all 15 cases. Good. So for them, it's fine. But Rabbi does not agree with them. So Rabbi so they, Rav and Rabbi Chia, would need to include cases of machalokot in order to make their rule work. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi himself does not have to agree with their rule. And when he codified the Mishnah, he only included cases that were in fact unanimous. Good. So that's that's Rav Safra's explanation. Okay, so we'll end off with showing the case here of how we could have Eshet Achiv Shelo Haya Be'olamo apply to a case of 2 sisters when one is permitted and one is prohibited. So what we have here are 4 brothers who are all born first, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. And there are also 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. Now, Reuven, right, that's 2, 3, number 3 here, Reuven marries Rachel and Shimon marries Levi. So 2 brothers are married to 2 sisters, which is fine. Reuven dies without children. All right, so and now Shimon will not be able to perform Yibum because it is his wife's sister, but there are 2 other brothers that can perform Yibum. However, before they perform Yibum, Yisachar is born. And this is the case, one of the cases we saw earlier, that even Rabbi Shimon would prohibit, because Yisachar is born now. It's after Reuven died, so Yisachar is not eligible to do Yibum because he is ineligible, rejected from doing Yibum. He is prohibited to Rachel as his brother's wife, and he is prohibited to her forever. So he will not be able to do Yibum. All right. So after he's born, Levi comes and he performs Yibum with Rachel. Good. So that's one cycle. Now the same thing happens on the other side. Shimon dies, and before Shimon dies, after he dies, before anyone does Yibum, Zevulun is born. Zevulun is now prohibited to Leah, because this is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Even in this case, Rabbanan would of course agree that even in this case, because Shimon was born after Shimon died, so ki yeshivu achim yachtav, in order to do Yibum, he has to be alive at the same time, and he was not. Therefore, he's ineligible to do Yibum. He's rejected, so he is prohibited from Leah forever because it is Shimon's wife. And he's a rejected Yavam, a rejected brother, and he can't be Yavam. So he's rejected forever. Instead, theoretically, Yisachar could perform Yibum. He was alive when Shimon was alive. But anyway, Yehuda comes, and he does Yibum with Leah. Next, Levi and Yehuda, they themselves both die without children. So all the original 4 brothers are dead. And so now you have these 2 sisters who are alive, and they fall to Yisachar and Zevulun to perform yibum. Well, here's the thing. Remember, Yisachar was prohibited to Rachel forever, and Zevulun was prohibited to Leah forever. However, Yisachar may and must perform yibum with Leah, and Zevulun must perform yibum with Rachel. So you have a case of asura lazeh. Rachel is asura le Yisachar, but muteret lazeh. But he may perform yibum with Leah, and so too Zevulun cannot be with Leah, but he can be with Rachel. And there you go. There is a case that works out. However, it will only work out according to Rabbi Shimon, and therefore this will require one to have a machloket included. And so that is the reason why Abaye said, yeah, it's all good except for the last one. That will depend on the pilukta. And if you don't want Rabbi to have any machloket, then you cannot apply the rule of Rav and Rabbi Chaya to this case. And Rav Safra says, I'd rather apply the rule to all cases. That's what Rav and Rabbi Chaya meant. However, Rabbi himself disagrees with the rule, and he doesn't think that you can apply asura lazeh mutat lazeh to all cases. Rabbi himself included all the cases that were unanimous, and that's all for today. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.